Life has a curious way of surprising us. Moments that quietly reroute the map we drew for ourselves. My name is Lila Moreau. I'm a 32-year-old pastry chef who traded the sleepy patisseries of Lyon for the sugar rush frenzy of Brooklyn after my desserts caught the eye of a Michelin-starred restaurant group. Between the clang of sheet pans and the blur of subway rides, I had to do the adult thing I'd been dodging for years: find a primary care physician. My new insurance wouldn't let me skate past another 6 months without a physical. I'd always treated doctors like fire alarms, useful in theory, ignored in practice. A box of macarons and a strong espresso had fixed most of my problems. But the paperwork was merciless. One rainy Tuesday in November, I finally opened my laptop, steam curling from a mug of hot chocolate, and scrolled through profiles until one stopped me cold. Dr. Elias Navarro, Columbia Med, former head of integrative medicine at a clinic in Barcelona, author of papers on stress and the autonomic nervous system. The reviews were glowing, but the line that hooked me was tucked into his bio. Asterisk care should taste like home, even when you're far from it. Asterisk is an expat who still measured flour in grams and cried over French radio. That sentence felt like a lifeline. The clinic sat in a converted loft in Dumbo, all exposed brick and skylights, with the faint scent of bergamot drifting from diffusers instead of bleach. A chalkboard by the door listed the day's herbal tea: chamomile lavender. I almost believed I'd walked into a bakery by mistake. Ms. Moreau. Dr. Navarro is ready, the receptionist said, her voice soft against the murmur of jazz. I followed her past shelves of succulents and framed botanical prints to a corner office that looked out over the East River. He was already standing when I entered, reviewing a tablet with the same concentration I give a temperamental ganache. Tall, dark-haired, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A faint scar across one knuckle like he'd once lost a fight with a mandolin. When he looked up, the room seemed to exhale. "Lila," he said, my name rolling off his tongue with a trace of an accent I couldn't place Spanish, maybe softened by years abroad. "Welcome to New York." His handshake was warm, deliberate, the kind that says, "I'm here, I'm listening." I laughed, a nervous puff of air. "Still getting used to the volume?" He smiled, and the scar on his knuckle caught the light. "Volume is good for bread, less so for blood pressure." "Let's see where we are." He started with the basics: height, weight, the usual choreography. But Elias moved like someone who'd once danced flamenco, every gesture precise, unhurried. When he asked me to sit, he didn't bark orders. He invited. "Your chart says you're a chef," he said, scrolling. "Long hours on your feet, sugar crashes, adrenaline spikes. Sound familiar?" "Like you've been hiding in my walk-in," I admitted. He chuckled, low and genuine. "I trained in a restaurant kitchen one summer in Seville. Learned more about cortisol there than in med school. The exam itself should have been clinical, but it wasn't." He explained every step asterisk. "I'm going to listen to your heart now. Breathe normally asterisk." His voice a steady metronome. When the stethoscope touched my back, cold metal met warm skin, and I shivered. "Sorry," he murmured. "Should have warmed it." "It's fine," I said, but my pulse betrayed me, thudding like a stand mixer on high. He noticed. Of course he did. Heart rate's up. Perfectly normal. "Want to talk for a minute?" And somehow, we did. I told him about the croissant lamination that failed at 3 a.m., about missing my grandmother's kitchen, about how New York smelled like ambition and hot dogs. He told me about his mother's pagella, about leaving Spain because he wanted to treat the whole person, not just the symptom. 20 minutes later, the tension in my shoulders had loosened without me noticing. "All right," he said, setting the tablet aside. "Let's finish up." The rest was textbook: reflexes, blood draw, a quick palpation of my abdomen. Professional, respectful. But there was a moment when he pressed 2 fingers just below my ribs to check my liver, that his touch lingered half a second longer than strictly necessary. Not inappropriate, just aware. I felt it in my sternum, a flutter like the first rise of dough. When it was over, he washed his hands at the sink, sleeves pushed higher, forearms dusted with faint flower-like scars. "You're in excellent health, Lila, But your shoulders, he dried his hands, then, without asking, stepped behind me. May I? I nodded, throat dry. His thumbs found the knots at the base of my neck with the certainty of someone who'd needed 1,000 loaves. Gentle pressure, slow circles. You carry your stress like a tray of soufflés, he said quietly, breath warm against my hair. One wrong move and it all collapses. I let out a laugh that sounded more like a sigh. Occupational hazard. Mine too, he said. But we can share the load. His hands stilled, resting lightly on my shoulders. The room was quiet, except for the rain tapping the skylight. I could feel the heat of his palms through my thin sweater, and the steady rhythm of his breathing behind me. Elias. I said, his name felt new in my mouth, like a secret ingredient. Leela. He didn't move. Not yet. Eventually he stepped back, but the air between us stayed charged, like the moment before lightning. Follow up in 6 months, he said, voice steady again. But if the city gets too loud, come in sooner. Tea's always on. I stood, legs unsteady. What kind do you keep for insomniac bakers? He grinned, and the scar on his knuckle flashed again. Chamomile with orange blossom. Reminds me of home. As I left, the receptionist handed me a small paper bag. Inside, a single Madeleine, still warm, dusted with sugar. A note in elegant script, asterisk for the road. E, asterisk. I bit into it on the subway platform. Lemon, butter, a whisper of almond. Perfect. That was only the beginning. Weeks blurred into a rhythm of early mornings and late nights. But now there was a new constant. Texts from an unknown. Number that turned out to be Elias. Nothing overt. Just recipes swapped at 1 a.m. Try browning the butter first. Questions about my day. A photo of the river at sunset, captioned, thought you'd like the light. I started scheduling follow-ups that had nothing to do with blood pressure. He'd examine the callus on my index finger from piping bags, prescribe stretches for my wrists, then linger over herbal tea in his office after hours. The skylight would darken, the city lights flickering on below us like sugar crystals on creme brulee. One night, snow started falling fat, lazy flakes that stuck to the windows. I'd come in complaining of a persistent headache, but we both knew it was an excuse. Close your eyes, he said, dimming the lights. His fingers found the tension at my temples, tracing slow, deliberate lines. Breathe with me. Inhale, exhale, the scent of bergamot and warm skin. You're trembling, he whispered. Cold, I lied. He moved closer, till I could feel the heat of him along my back. Leela, I turned in the chair. Our knees brushed. I'm your doctor, he said. But his voice cracked on the last word. And I'm your patient, I answered. But I'm also a woman who hasn't stopped thinking about your hand since the day you found that knot in my shoulder. Silence. Then, carefully, he cupped my face. His thumb brushed my lower lip, and I tasted flour and snow. The kiss was slow. It's deliberate like proofing dough, like waiting for the perfect crust. When we pulled apart, foreheads still touching, I laughed softly. I'm going to need a new primary care physician, I said. I know a guy, he murmured. But he's terrible at boundaries. Kept it quiet. Stolen moments between shifts, him sneaking into the restaurant kitchen at 2 a.m. to taste a new yuzu curd, me slipping into the clinic after closing with a box of cardamom palmiers. The scar on his knuckle became my favorite landmark. I'd trace it while he slept, his head on my shoulder in the loft above the clinic. One spring evening, the restaurant hosted a pop-up dinner featuring my desserts. Elias sat at the chef's table, tie loosened, eyes shining, every time a plate went out. When the final course, a lavender honey madeleine with orange blossom creme, was served, he stood, cleared his throat. Leela Moreau, he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. You've been prescribing joy in edible form for months. I'm ready to make it official. He dropped to one knee, pulled out a tiny box. Inside, not a ring, but a Madeleine-shaped charm on a thin gold chain. Marry me, he said, and let's keep taking care of each other. The kitchen erupted. I cried into the apron I'd forgotten I was wearing. Later in the walk-in cooler, because where else would a pastry chef say yes? He kissed the flower from my cheek and whispered, "Your blood pressure is going to be perfect from now on." I laughed, tasting sugar and forever. "Only if you keep browning the butter." Outside, Brooklyn smelled like rain and possibility. Life, it turned out, had been proofing all along. The fluorescent hum of the office lights felt louder than usual, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in my ears. I rubbed the back of my neck, laughing too hard at my own excuse. "Deadlines, energy drinks, the usual cocktail," I said. Aiming for breezy, Dr. Elias Reyes leaned against the counter, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "That mix will keep anyone awake," he said, voice low, almost amused. But the amusement didn't reach his eyes. Something else did something careful. Like he was holding a breath he didn't want me to hear. When I shifted on the exam table, the paper crinkled too loudly. Our gazes locked. His were dark, steady, unreadable, except for the flicker of warmth that hadn't been there during any of our previous appointments. "Julian," said after a beat that stretched too long, "I need to say this before I talk myself out of it. I'm good at boundaries. I have to be. But with you," he stopped, exhaling through his nose. Today they felt like chalk lines in the rain. I swallowed. "Professionally." He nodded once, and everything else. The room shrank. Outside the half-open blinds, midtown traffic hissed and honked, a reminder that the world hadn't paused even if we had. Elias straightened, tugging the sleeve of his white coat as if the fabric itself could stitch the distance back together. "You should see Dr. Patel next time," he said, gentle but final. "It's the ethical move." The words landed heavier than they should have. I managed a nod. "If that's what you need," he hesitated, then tore a leaf from his prescription pad. The pen scratched once, twice. He folded the slip and pressed it into my palm. "This isn't a referral," he murmured. "It's just me. If you ever want coffee that isn't hospital vending machine, swill." Stared at the paper like it might burn. "Conversation's cheaper than therapy," I said. His smile was small, rueful, grateful. "Sometimes it's better." That evening I told myself I was only walking off the restless ache in my chest. I ended up at a narrow espresso bar on 78th, the kind with scarred wooden tables and a barista who hummed Coltrane under his breath. Elias was already there, jacket swapped for a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows. He looked younger without the stethoscope, almost uncertain. "I took a chance," he admitted. Stirring sugar he didn't need, so did I. I slid into the chair opposite. Figured we owed each other the rest of the sentence. Talked until the barista started stacking chairs. About growing up me in Jersey suburbs, him in Manila before med school in Chicago. About the way skyscrapers at dusk look like circuit boards for dreams. About the difference between fixing code and fixing people, and how both can break you if you let them. When the lights dimmed to closing, he tilted his head toward the door. "Walk." The October air carried roasted chestnuts and taxi exhaust. We moved slowly, hands in pockets, shoulders brushing now and then like punctuation marks. "I've never slipped like that," he said suddenly, staring at the sidewalk. 20 years of training, and one look at you unravels the whole syllabus." "You didn't unravel," I said. "You just paused the lecture." He laughed. The sound startled out of him. Still felt like free fall. At the corner of Amsterdam, a gust whipped my scarf loose. His fingers caught the fabric before it flew, lingering a second longer than necessary. The touch was electric, accidental, deliberate all at once. "No going back to fluorescent lights and blood pressure cuffs," he said quietly. "I don't want fluorescent anything with you." I answered. He searched my face the way he probably searched scans for shadows slow. Methodical, afraid to miss the detail that changes everything. Then he leaned in. The kiss was tentative, coffee sweet, asking permission in the same breath it granted it. When we parted, his forehead rested against mine. "You sure?" He whispered terrifyingly, I said. We found his apartment, 6 blocks north. A pre-war walk-up with creaking stairs and a radiator that knocked like an impatient heart. Inside, books leaned in precarious towers. A single string of Edison bulbs glowed over the couch. He shrugged off his coat, suddenly shy. I don't entertain, he said, gesturing at the clutter. Patients don't see this version. I'm not a patient tonight, he exhaled, tension uncoiling. We talked until the city quieted about his mother's adobo recipe. My first buggy line of code at age 12, the way fear and want can wear the same face. When words thinned, he traced the inside of my wrist with his thumb. Mapping pulse points like new geography, I kissed him again, deliberate this time. He answered with a hunger that had been banked for weeks, maybe years. Hands slid under shirts, learning textures cotton, skin, the faint scar under his left rib from appendectomy in med school. We moved to the bedroom without hurry, shedding clothes the way you peel labels off bottles you're not ready to recycle. Afterward, tangled in sheets that smelled of cedar and detergent, he spoke into the dark. I keep thinking I should feel guilty. Do you? No, he said, surprised. Just astonished. Morning arrived gray and drizzly. He made eggs while I stole in his Columbia hoodie. Over coffee, real coffee. Not the tar water from his office. We negotiated the fragile architecture of what came next. Separate charts, he said firmly. No overlap. I'll refer anyone who asks how we met to creative fiction. I design branding for a living. I can sell the story. Weeks blurred. Stolen dinners in Queens hole into walls. Matinee movies where we held hands like teenagers. One Sunday, he dragged me to the cloisters at dawn. We had the place almost to ourselves, breath fogging in the cold stone corridors. I used to come here between residency shifts, he said, tracing the unicorn's horn in the tapestry. Reminded me there were still impossible things worth believing in. I bumped his shoulder. Flatterer. He caught my hand serious. I'm not good at this, Julian. The last person I dated thought on call meant optional. I don't want to be optional for you. You're not, I said. You're the bug I never want to fix. Winter arrived with its particular brutality. One night the hospital paged him at 2 a.m. Multi-car pileup on the FDR. I woke to an empty bed and a note. Asterisk back by dawn. There's leftover lasagna. Don't wait up. Asterisk. I waited anyway, coating on the couch until the sky turned dishwater pale. He came in smelling of snow and antiseptic eyes, bloodshot. I met him at the door with coffee and the kind of kiss that doesn't ask questions. Later, wrapped in a blanket on the fire escape, city lights glittering below like spilled code, he rested his head on my shoulder. I keep waiting for the other shoe, he murmured. What shoe? The one that says this was a mistake, that I'll hurt you, that I already have. I threaded my fingers through his. Then we'll keep barefoot. Spring unfurled slowly. Cherry blossoms on the Brooklyn Bridge, rooftop picnics, arguments about whose turn it was to debug the dishwasher. We learned the small intimacies, how he took his tea with condensed milk, the way I hummed when concentrating, the exact pressure of thumb against temple that dissolved his migraines. One Saturday in May, he blindfolded me with one of his ties navy silk. Still carrying the faint scent of hospital soap and led me uptown. When the blindfold slipped, we stood on the observation deck of the Empire State, tourists swirling around us like schools of fish. Remember the first thing you told me? He asked. That I hadn't slept in 3 days? He smiled. Close. You said the city was too big to feel anything in? He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside, not a ring, something better. A brass key, old-fashioned, heavy. My place is a 4th-floor walk-up with a temperamental boiler. But it's big enough for 2, if we keep the books in stacks and the coffee strong. I stared at the key, throat tight. You're asking me to move in with a key you probably lifted from a prop department? Stole it from the cardiology lounge, actually? They'll never miss it. He laughed, then sobered. I'm asking you to stay. Not because the city's too big, but because with you, it finally fits. I kissed him there, 86 floors above the streets that had once swallowed me whole. Below, yellow cabs crawled like toys. Above, gulls wheeled in impossible blue. That night, we carried the first box up for flights my ancient iMac, a betrayal of dust bunnies. He set it on the desk beside his stack of New England journals, then pulled me down onto the rug still littered with bubble wrap. "Welcome home," he whispered against my neck. Outside, sirens dopplered into the distance. Inside, the radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. And for the first time, the sound felt like a heartbeat instead of a warning. The first time Elias saw Jordan, it was through the haze of a crowded bookstore cafe on a rainy Thursday in Seattle. Elias was shelving returns in the poetry section, his fingers stained with ink from annotating margins, when a voice cut through the murmur of rain and espresso machines. "Excuse me, do you have anything by Ocean Vuong that isn't sold out?" Elias turned. The man stood with one hand in the pocket of a charcoal coat, the other holding a dripping umbrella like a reluctant sword. His hair was dark and curling at the ends, damp from the storm, and his eyes green, sharp. Tired held the kind of exhaustion that came from too many late nights and not enough sleep. "Night sky with exit wounds is in the back," Elias said, wiping his hands on his apron. "I was saving it for someone who looked like they needed it." Jordan smiled, small and crooked. "That obvious? Poetry people always look like they're carrying something heavier than the book." They talked for 20 minutes, while Elias rang up the sale. Jordan was a paramedic, newly transferred from Portland after a bad call that still woke him at 3 a.m. He didn't say what the call was. He didn't have to. Elias recognized the tremor in his voice, the way his fingers worried the edge of his coffee cup like it might disappear. Elias gave him the staff discount without being asked. Jordan came back the next week. And the week after? Always on Thursdays. Always after the dinner rush. Always with a new bruise on his knuckles or a shadow under his eyes. He never bought anything. He just lingered in the poetry section, tracing spines with the same careful attention he used when checking a pulse. One night, the store was nearly empty. Rain lashed the windows in sheets. Elias was closing up when Jordan appeared at the counter, soaked through, holding a crumpled paper bag. "I brought dumplings," he said. "From the place on Pine, figured you hadn't eaten." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You're bribing me with food now? Consider it a thank you for not kicking me out when I fall asleep in the armchair." They ate on the floor behind the register, backs against the shelves, steam fogging the air between them. Jordan talked about the call that had broken him a kid, a fire, a mother screaming in a language he didn't speak. Elias listened. When Jordan's voice cracked, Elias reached over and laced their fingers together without thinking. Jordan didn't pull away. The first kiss happened in the alley, behind the bookstore. Under the awning where the dumpsters smelled like old coffee grounds and wet cardboard, Jordan had walked Elias out after closing, insisting on waiting for the bus in the rain. The streetlight flickered. Jordan's coat was too thin for November. "You're freezing," Elias said. "I run hot," Jordan lied. Elias stepped closer. "Liar." Jordan's laugh was soft, surprised. Then his hand was on Elias's jaw, thumb brushing the corner of his mouth like he was checking for a pulse. The kiss was careful at first, testing, apologetic then deeper, like they'd both been holding their breath for weeks. When they pulled apart, Jordan rested his forehead against Elias's. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably," Elias agreed. "But I'm off at 6 tomorrow." They didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Jordan's crew at the station called him Ghost because he worked doubles and never talked about his life. Ilias's coworkers thought he was dating a barista from down the street. They met in the in-between hours. 3 a.m. shifts ending, 5 a.m. openings beginning. Jordan would show up with coffee and a tired smile, and Elias would leave books on the passenger seat of Jordan's rig with notes tucked inside. "Read this when the world gets too loud." Jordan started leaving things too. A spare stethoscope in Ilias's apron pocket. A Polaroid of the two of them asleep on Elias's couch, Jordan's head on Elias's chest. Time-stamped for 17 a.m., a voicemail that just said, *, I'm outside. Let me in. *, the first fight was over a missed call. Elias had been waiting at the diner on Capitol Hill. The one with the cracked vinyl booths and the jukebox that only played Sinatra. Jordan was late. Then later, then not coming at all. When Jordan finally texted * bad call, kid didn't make it. Cleus didn't respond. He sat in the booth until the waitress stopped refilling his coffee, then walked home in the rain. Jordan showed up at 2 a.m., still in his uniform, eyes red. "I'm sorry," he said at the door. "I should have called." "You didn't," Elias said. "You just disappeared. I didn't know how to say it." "You'd say it anyway." They stood in the hallway, rain dripping from Jordan's hair onto the hardwood. Then Jordan stepped forward and kissed him like an apology, like a promise, like the only language he had left. Winter came hard. The city shut down under ice and power outages. Jordan worked 72-hour shifts, sleeping in the ambulance bay when the roads were too slick to drive. Elias kept the bookstore open for the stragglers, old men reading newspapers, teenagers charging phones. A woman who came every night to cry quietly in the biography section. One night, the power went out at 9 p.m. Elias lit candles and kept the door unlocked. Jordan arrived just before midnight, covered in soot and someone else's blood. "I can't do this," he said, voice raw. "I can't keep bringing this home to you." Elias locked the door, turned the sign to closed, took Jordan's hand, and led him to the back room, where the emergency lanterns glowed soft and gold. "You're not bringing it home," Elias said. "You're coming home. There's a difference." He helped Jordan out of his uniform, washed the soot from his arms with bottled water and paper towels. They didn't speak. When Jordan started shaking, Elias wrapped him in a blanket and held him until the tremors stopped. Later, the dark Jordan whispered, "I used to think saving people would be enough, but it's not. Not when I come back and you're the only thing that feels real." Elias kissed the top of his head. "Then stay." Spring brought change. Jordan's captain pulled him aside after a shift. "You're burning out, kid. Take the leave. Use it." Jordan took it. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to be. He spent the first week sleeping. The second, following Elias around the bookstore like a lost dog. The third, he started talking about the community center he'd always wanted, somewhere kids could go after school, where queer teens wouldn't have to hide, where paramedics could teach CPR and poets could read to toddlers. "You should do it," Elias said one night, sketching floor plans on the back of a receipt while Jordan cooked pasta in the tiny apartment kitchen. "I don't know how." "I do," they found. The space in the Central District old print shop with cracked skylights in a loading dock that smelled like ink and possibility. The landlord was a retired nurse who'd lost her son to overdose. She gave them a deal. Elias designed it like a heartbeat, open, flowing, alive. A reading nook with floor-to-ceiling windows. A kitchen where kids could learn to cook. A trauma bay in the back, just in case. Jordan handled the permits, the grants, the endless paperwork. They fought over paint colors and budget lines. Made up in the supply closet with the door locked and the lights off. The first volunteer was a trans kid named Marisol who showed up with a toolbox and a fierce determination to fix anything broken. Then came the others, retired teachers, burnout nurses, a drag queen who taught self-defense on Tuesdays, the night before opening. They stood in the finished space, arms around each other. The skylights were patched, the walls painted in soft blues and greens. Someone had hung fairy lights. Someone else had left a stack of children's books on the front table. "It's real," Jordan said, voice thick. "Yeah," Elias whispered. "We did this." Jordan turned to him, eyes shining. "Marry me," Elias laughed, startled. "Here now." "No, but soon. I want it official. I want everyone to know you're the reason I didn't disappear." Elias kissed him, slow and sure. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was small. Held in the community center's garden, under a canopy of string lights and cherry blossoms. Marisol officiated, wearing a crown of paper cranes. Jordan wore his dress uniform. Elias wore the same charcoal coat from the bookstore, now patched at the elbows. They wrote their own vows. Jordan went first. "I used to think love was a liability, something that made the job harder. Then you showed up with dumplings and bad poetry and refused to let me go. You are my safe place, my soft landing, my reason to come home." Elias's voice shook. You taught me that healing isn't just for other people, that sometimes the person who needs saving is the one holding the stretcher. I will love you through every shift, every nightmare, every sunrise we steal. You are my home. They exchanged rings, simple titanium bands engraved with the date of the bookstore kiss. Years later, the community center thrived. Kids came for story time and stayed for college prep. Paramedics taught first aid. Poets read on Friday nights. Elias published a chapbook dedicated to Jordan. Jordan got promoted to training coordinator. Finally sleeping through the night, one Thursday always, Thursdays, Elias found Jordan in the poetry section of the center's library, holding a worn copy of Night Sky with exit wounds. Still saving it for someone? Elias asked, wrapping his arms around Jordan's waist from behind. Jordan smiled, turning in his arms. Already did. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city hummed. Inside, two men who'd once been strangers stood in the quiet certainty of a life they'd built. One poem, one shift, one dumpling at a time.